The gentlelady yields, and I now recognize Mr. Cloud from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you all for being here. Appreciate you, Chairwoman, for holding this hearing on this topic. It's certainly one that we've talked about before, but one that we've seen very little action on. One of the reasons and discussion points surrounding those who were proponents of teleworking were that we would save all this money on not needing these federal buildings. And yet what we've seen was, in the business world, what you would do is you'd lose a little productivity with people maybe working remotely, but you would gain that from, less cost and overhead of maintaining buildings and facilities. But of course, in the nature of the federal government, we sent people home, we got less productivity, and we continue to grow our assets and property portfolios, and now are maintaining empty buildings to the tunes of millions and millions and millions and billions of dollars even. Biden had, as Mr. Fallon mentioned, committed to getting the workforce back to work in person in offices, and of course we know that didn't happen. This has really been a bipartisan issue. Even Obama in 2011, in the campaign to cut waste, laid out what you could almost describe as the goals of DOGE, but we saw very little progress over that. And so our friends in the left right now are kind of complaining about how this is being done, but one would have to ask them, they had all the House, the Senate, and the White House just 3 months ago. Why didn't they do anything about it then? And so now we continue to, I'm sorry, you're right, a couple years ago, but nonetheless, you had it a couple years ago and didn't do anything with it. And so now we find ourselves to the point where President Trump and the Trump administration is finally doing something about this, and this is good for the American people. We must find savings for it. As Mr. Fallon mentioned, the vast majority, I think 17 of 24 agencies were almost vacant, it seems, using 25% less, and then we have a backlog of $370 billion in maintenance costs backlogs. And so we have to do something about this. And I think it's worthy to note, you keep mentioning selling properties in a down market. Who would benefit from that? Well, that would be the American people who are buying it. These businesses who could buy it up and turn it into a profitable asset, create a property that would bring tax flow to Washington, D.C., for example, income, as opposed to a vacant building sitting there being a burden on the American people. So there's a lot of reasons to continue to move forward on this. Of course, we want to make sure this is done the right way. Mr. Maroney, could you speak to kind of the decision-making process that you look to bring? First of all, thank you for being willing to take up this fight that so many administrations have been willing to talk about and bring little action to. But could you talk about kind of your decision-making process and apparatus as we continue to look forward, and how you will evaluate what properties are valid and which ones are not for sale or
right.
or
So for
off-leasing?
For owned properties, GSA and the administration in general should take a look at first. Sequencing makes sense. Take a look at the properties. There are already a number of properties that have been previously identified as properties that should be gotten rid of. Oftentimes, these are buildings that are underused, have been for a long time, and have large deferred maintenance liabilities. So it makes sense. Start with those. Get those out the door as quickly as you can and get those savings. And then as the new data that we're going to have on utilization, which is going to start rolling in July, comes in, you can use that to further assess where are there additional properties that are underused. We'll have that data for the first time for many buildings, and assess what makes next sense in the next tranche to sell off and consolidate. This all is going to take money. It does take money to move out of spaces, to build out consolidations, to reconfigure spaces, but at the end of the day, you save. Not only do you potentially get proceeds from the sales, but you also save the operation and maintenance costs, which have a very long tail, and save a lot of money over time by getting rid of buildings that are just too costly to maintain now.
Now, more than half of GSA's leases, I think it's 4,108 out of 7,685 are set to expire between, 2023, but in 2027. How much of the federal government can save by allowing these leases to expire that are not needed,
right,
using properties that we already own?
Right. Well, from a pure financial basis, we spend about $6 billion on leases each year. So if you're reducing whatever the math is, I can't do the public math, but it's a substantial amount you can get from lease savings. You just want to make sure you know what your end state is going to be. How much space are you aiming for at the end to make sure you're sequencing things in a way that makes sense?
I only have 8 seconds left, so I will yield back to the chair.